if we want Muslim unification, what are the key questions? How do we see society? What are the images that we use? As an ummah, we can't remain passive and be the object of these turns, always grappling in a reactionary manner.
I would like to call to the stage Uthman Badar. Uthman is the Research Operations Manager and Lead Editor at Ummatics and Sessional Lecturer at Western Sydney University, where he earned his PhD in 2023. His scholarship interrogates secularism, liberal political theory, and Muslim public theology. I think it's probably fair to say that Uthman has been a really reassuring presence for Muslims in Australia, but also Muslims in the Western world. And on a number of occasions, you've seen Uthman. I mean, I think he's been pretty good at expressing sort of Islam and the ideas of Islam in the public consciousness in Australia, especially amongst young Muslims, but also within non-Muslim society. Dr. Uthman, can I ask you to take the floor, inshallah?
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Bismillah walhamdulillah wa salatu wa salamu ala rasulillah. Allahumma yassir wa la tu'assir wa tammin bil khair wa bika nasta'in ya fattah. Closer, a bit closer. Okay, thank you very much. I'd like to start by saying I don't know what Jalal was getting at in those last few comments about me. But thank you for the generosity. My task in these 20 minutes, let me turn my stopwatch on, is a little bit different. Although our topics, mine and Dr. Hiba's, are similar in the program, I am more about presenting our research agenda as opposed to speaking on the topic of civilization itself, which is good because I could not match the erudition, depth and clarity of Dr. Hiba. So I'm going to do two things, roughly 10 minutes each. One is to present our research agenda, which was published a few months ago. And the second thing then is to speak about the first section of it. There's 3 sections. I'm going to talk about the first section, and 2 of my colleagues will speak about the other 2 sections. And a good place to start is to mention that, of course, the Ummatics Institute is a research institute. We aim to conduct, facilitate and foster research. So to do some of it ourselves, but to assist others, facilitate others in the Ummah to do research. And so, of course, we have a research program. Last year in our conference in Malaysia, I presented our basic thinking of our heuristic, what, why, how, what's the importance and need of Muslim unification, what are the institutional forms that it can take, and how do we get there? Models of transformation. That's a very broad level program. Since then, and one of the points of today's conference is to report back to you, the people, about what we've been doing in the last 12 months. We've been able, alhamdulillah, to articulate a complete research agenda. So from a broad heuristic to a number of domains, various subtopics. Again, it's not exhaustive, but it is a start. So we have articulated that agenda. This is on our website. It was published in February. I encourage everyone to have a look. There's a PDF. It's a 6,000 word document roughly. So, have your tea or coffee with it as you go through it. The way I want to present this agenda is by approaching it from 4 directions. What are its aims? What are some of its structures? What are some of its features and its modes? The aim of the research agenda is to provide a bird's eye view of our research program, an overall view. And in doing so, it tries to articulate Ummatic epistemology, to reorient research priorities and approaches in the service of civilizational renewal. And importantly, although it is a research program, and so it might be thought to be purely academic, the idea is that this will inform thought and action. The research agenda is structured in a number of ways. The most obvious structure is that there are some domains. There are 3 domains. Each domain has a number of topics, and then each topic is given a number of specific questions. These are sample questions. As I've said, it's not exhaustive, but this is how it's designed. Another structural element of the research agenda is that it can be thought of as a matrix of vectors, vertical and horizontal. The vertical vectors represent the topics, so civilization, political, economic, and the horizontal vectors represent different expertise, different forms of knowledge, so normative, ethical, so grounded in our texts, Sharia, but also we need the empirical and the historical, we need the analytical and the conceptual. So there are various knowledges, if you will, that are relevant, and there are various specific domains and topics that have been articulated. Of course, in this document, the questions are broad level. The idea is that area experts in each field will refine these questions to produce more specific research questions before the research is undertaken. So, as I've said, there are 3 domains in this research agenda. The first one is civilizational and intellectual renewal. The second one is political unification and transformation. And the third is economic integration and development. And by the end of, I think, the second or third session, you'll have a much better idea of all 3 of these. What are some of the features of this agenda? This agenda is built on epistemic humility, what we can call epistemic humility. What that means is, as Dr. Hiba already mentioned, we're not starting this, we haven't come on some new discovery that, we need to research these questions. There is a long history of ummatic research on these questions, but there's need for more. There's need for more efforts, and so we are building on previous research. We are asking questions, trying to answer them, asking other people to answer them, and get that collective discourse and conversation moving. And so it's the collaborative aspect of this research agenda and program are extremely important. We collaborate with current research, we're building on previous research. So it's a connection of past, present, and inshallah future. It is a human endeavor, there's a lot of room for improvement. In fact, part of the reason of so this is a research agenda, we could have kept this private and said this is what we're working on. The point of making it public, one of the main points is to invite critical feedback, not just on the topics, on the agenda itself. For you to tell us, why isn't this topic there? Why do you have this? What about these questions? Already today, Dr. Raheba has mentioned a number of good points that we can take back and think about, should this be there? Should that not be there? Should this be framed differently? So we invite that sort of critical feedback. This is a living, evolving document. It's not set in stone that this is it. This is version 1. And we anticipate version 1.1, 1.2, 2, and so on and so forth. Of course, we also, the other point of publishing it is we want others to do research. Well, these are simply not questions we can answer on our own. Very simple and straightforward. It requires many more heads, many more groups in the Ummah to take this research forward. And so it is very much a collective Ummatic effort in which it's worth, I think, mentioning other institutions, starting with ISAM, where we are today, where we're generously hosted. There are various other, I'm not going to read these, you can see them themselves. There are already various institutions. Some of them are universities that I haven't mentioned here. Some are affiliated with universities, some are private, various models, all very important. But in mentioning those, perhaps I can mention, because the question still arises then, well, why do you have a new research agenda when this has been happening for so long? And I think, as I said, number one, there is a need for more. The Ummah has not quite arrived at where she wants to be. That should be obvious. So, but there are distinguishing features. Everyone has their own distinguishing elements, and perhaps for Ummatics, I would suggest that the guiding good or the guiding objective is unification. So this is an agenda that's built around that idea. So it's like, if we want Muslim unification, what are the key questions? What are the main topics? What are the domains? And so on and so forth. That's one element. The other element I would say that is very important is that we want to be doggedly independent, strictly independent. So, of course, there is great research that happens in the Western Academy on some of these questions. But as we know, there are also limitations. Sometimes you have to self-censor. You have to use a particular language. All right? Other institutes that are not part of the Western Academy, but are affiliated with other governments. So there are limitations. So we're trying a model where we can ask our own questions, we can answer them, we can use our own language. No one's telling us, these are the research priorities that you have to work with. We set the priorities, right? So I think that's also an important element. Some of the modes, some of the ways in which we are internally conducting this research, there's research papers, of course, by people within the Institute, fellows, but also we commission papers from outside. We use working groups and workshops, like the one that we will start on Monday, inshallah, on political unification. We had another one last year. Research centre partnerships, this is part of the collaborative aspect. In fact, I mentioned Markaz al-Hadara in the previous slide. We've already managed, alhamdulillah, to come to a memorandum of understanding with them as a first concrete collaboration, and we hope to do that with other institutions as well. We have an idea to have a wiki project, a kind of open source. So you have questions or literature reviews that others can come in and add to as an open source format. So this is the use of technology to further the aim of Ummatic collaboration. And we have recommendations papers, and we also are working on language and region specific research. So we can't just have research in English. That's not good enough for an Ummatic agenda. Okay, so we want to translate good research into Arabic and Turkish and Urdu and various Ummatic languages, but we also want research to be done in those languages, because language is important, culture is important, the language of the Ummah are important. So language and region specific, okay? Research in Turkey, research in Pakistan, right? And other parts of the Ummah. So now, that's the first part of my presentation, and I'm roughly within the 10-minute mark. I want to now pivot to talk about the first domain, which is civilizational and intellectual renewal. And as I've said, so I'm going to cover the first part. Dr. Mustafa Salama will cover the second part, political unification and transformation. What do we mean by civilizational and intellectual renewal? The way we've articulated the broad area objective is to say that this domain seeks to delineate or identify and inspire a renewed Islamic civilizational ethos, grounded in the Islamic tradition, of course, and open to the best elements of modernity. There are various sub-areas and subtopics. Actually, let me just mention, look at these. You don't have to read all of that. 6 areas: theorizing modern Islamic civilization, Ummatic sociality and communality, managing deep differences, social change and revival, environment and technology, and education. These are the 6 subtopics. Under each subtopic, there are specific questions, specific areas. Okay? So again, I won't go through these. I will present some examples from some of these shortly, but trying to pinpoint what exactly is meant by these different areas. So what I'd like to do is, instead of going through each of those, we don't have time for that, is to just pick 3 of them and talk in a little more depth about the questions, the problem, why it's important. And in speaking about the first one, I can also talk more about the domain as a whole. So theorizing modern Islamic civilization. I think an easy way to think about this is, you've got your political models and aims and objectives, you've got your economics, but underpinning a lot of this are certain foundations. So you can think of the civilizational domain as the domain which tries to articulate theological, epistemological, theoretical, conceptual foundations. Okay? What are Ummadic social imaginaries? How do we see society? What are the images that we use? What are Ummadic ethical dispositions, Ummadic frames, individual and collective, conceptual frames? And here we don't want to take things for granted. So, political, economic, social, cultural domain. What is the political in Islam? What is the economic? And in doing this, we have to appreciate, Dr. Heba already alluded to this, that we're asking these questions always already, if I can use a Heideggerian term, within another civilization and another civilizational frame of thinking. Because the divisions of political, economic, social, cultural are modern and a Western. Okay, so we're already trying to think through them, but you have to engage in that work of these different categories, and then we're trying to think, well, what is it in Islamic terms, and how do they relate to each other? So that's, I think, a broad way of thinking about what we mean by civilization. Having said that, I don't have that. Having said that, it is important. In fact, even the choice of word civilization is another example that could be used to make that point, that you are struggling with foreign categories as you try and think about your own categories and concepts. So civilization, as Dr. Hiba mentioned, there's a clear pejorative use, a negative use: civilization, mission, barbaric, savages, civilized, all of that. So it would be a valid critique for someone to say, why are you using the word civilization? But anyone who says that needs to provide an alternative. We could have said Islamic culture, but that's not an indigenous term either, right? Could we just use Arabic terms? Perhaps, but you're engaging in a global discourse. It's not, we could say, Islamic deen, right? Aqidah, foundations, asasiyat, or something like this, but how do you discourse with people who are not Muslims? So these are important questions that come up within the domain itself. Another topic within this domain is managing deep differences in the ummah. This is a very important one because perhaps arguably the most common refrain from both secular attackers and within the ummah is, what do you mean unity? How can we unite when we've got all these different theological sects and jurisprudential differences and nationalities and nationalism, all these divisions? You're dreaming if you're talking about unification. So this is a very, very important area that needs to address nationalistic divides, theological divides, sectarianism, linguistic, cultural, various elements. So if we take one of those, for example, theological and jurisprudential differences, we're suggesting that we need to explore frameworks for how to manage theological and legal pluralism while doing two things: upholding the ethos of respect, not just tolerance and respect, without compromising the pursuit of truth. So this is a way of framing the challenge. It's an extremely important question. A lot of our classical literature and a lot of our contemporary literature focuses on the adab al-ikhtilaf literature. It's ethical in nature. It's like, we have to be open to multiple views. We have to respect each other. That's good. But what about politically speaking? What's our political theory of managing this? Again, not just within Muslims, but non-Muslims, minorities, and so on and so forth. So, very significant. We had a workshop on this last year, and we're hoping to publish some initial papers later on this year, but again, to facilitate research more broadly on this topic. Final example, social change and revival. This is in the how department. Transformation, how do you get there? We need to look at a number of issues here. Islamic approaches to social change, normative elements, analytical conceptual elements. What's the normative Islamic direction on societal transformation? What does the Seerah teach us? What does the Sunnah teach us? What does the Quran say about societal transformation or social change? But not just that, we live in the modern world, so we have to be attentive to historicity, the particular nature of the reality that you face. So, and we're not the only ones who are trying to, resist and change the global capitalist order. So what can we learn from others? And this question of, for example, there are long-standing debates among Muslims about revolution versus evolution versus, within the system or outside the system. Do you go inside and get compromised? Or do you stay outside and stay pure? Right? And, do we focus on structural change or policy change, and so on and so forth? But we're not the only ones having these debates. In fact, there are people who have been having these debates much before us. So, Rosa Luxemburg published Reform versus or Revolution in 1901. Because 15 years after Marx laid down their theories, you had a split among socialists, with some saying, no, we need to go within the system and we can reform capitalism, and others saying, what are you talking about? This is blasphemous. Blasphemous to historical materialism and the fact that capitalism is going to fall on its own, and so on and so forth, right? And then there's 100 years of them debating and practicing and trying and doing all of that. What can we learn from that? Not because they're going to teach us the normative elements, but they're going to teach us an experience with modernity, which is very different from pre-modern attempts at social change. So this is the question of strategy. It's a very important one. But I have 1 minute, so let me conclude by saying that this research program hopes to accentuate, to highlight, to consolidate the Ummatic turn. The Ummatic turn is not something we're starting, it's already there. But we hope to consolidate and push it in the right direction. There have been many turns in the 20th century: the linguistic turn, the cultural turn, the digital turn, the ecological turn. As an ummah, however, we can't remain passive and be the object of these turns, always grappling in a reactionary manner. The ummah already thinks ummatically in various respects. We need to work in various areas to consolidate and sharpen and push this in the right direction with reliance on Allah Ta'ala, that He will show us the ways to achieve His pleasure, which is our ultimate objective. Barakallahu feekum. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.